subtitled Nothing Personal, because in this sutta, the Buddha answers that great question, what is the self? And he answers it very clearly, very plainly. And it follows last week's sutta from the Anatta Lakkhna Sutta, where the Buddha teaches not that there's no such thing as a self. That's one of the big fallacies of modern Buddhism. He used the term anatta, a common term during the Buddhist time, which means not self, exactly as it's meant to, not in some mystical connotation. In other words, the Buddha used the words anatta to describe the human beings' wrong views of self that we hold on to, rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. The views themselves do not constitute a self. They are not a self. That's what anatta means within the Buddhist Dhamma. It simply means, it doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a self. It simply means that the views that we're using to describe a self to ourselves and the world around us is a wrong view. Let go of the views. Ultimately, the Buddha's Dhamma is about recognizing and abandoning all views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That describes the process of awakening. And it really isn't anything else to the Buddha's Dhamma, but it does get deeper than that. So last week, the Buddha described what the self isn't. And he described that in relation to 5 clinging aggregates. Remember, the 5 clinging aggregates are the Buddha's description of the ongoing personal experience of suffering. And so we identify with form, feelings, perceptions, fabrications, and consciousness, ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That's the 5 clinging aggregates. And we cling those aggregates together and call that me. I identify as this physical form. I describe myself and the world around me by my feelings and what I think about those feelings, perceptions, and mental fabrications. And it's all sustained by that thing that everybody is enamored with, consciousness, except the Buddha recognized that consciousness rooted in ignorance is nothing to be enamored with. It's simply consciousness, it's simply ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance. Recognize that type of thinking, abandon it, and develop right view in the refined mindfulness of a Buddha. So now the Buddha teaches this, and it's a perfect sutta following Saturday's, it clearly describes what a human being actually is. And it describes all that a human being actually is and can ever be. It's also an interesting sutta because you really see the Buddha's sense of humor in this, which comes through in a lot of suttas, but not all of them, but this one in particular. The Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. On one occasion, the Buddha was wandering among the Magadhans. He entered Rajagaha and went to the potter Bhagava. He asked Bhagava, "If it is no inconvenience for you, friend, I will stay one night in your shed." "It is no inconvenience for me, but the wanderer Pukkasati has already taken up residence there. If he gives his permission, you may stay there as you like." Pukkasati, a fellow Sakyan, that's the Buddhist tribe, he was a Sakyan, had gone forth into homelessness and developed the Buddhist Dhamma. Going forth from homelessness into homelessness means you've left the world behind and you're studying with the Buddha. The Buddha approached Pukkasati, well, he wasn't studying with the Buddha, he was studying with the original sangha. The Buddha approached Pukkasati and asked him if he could stay one night in his shed. Pukkasati replied, "The shed is roomy, my friend. Stay as you like." The Buddha entered the shed and sat down on a pile of leaves and grass. Folding his legs crosswise and holding his body erect, he set mindfulness to the fore and began jhana. Pukkasati joined him in jhana meditation for most of the evening. As morning approached, the Buddha had the thought, "How inspiring Pukkasati behaves. Let me question him on his understanding." "Venerable Pukkasati, out of dedication to whom have you gone forth? Who is your teacher? And whose Dhamma are you practicing?" "My teacher is Gautama the Contemplative, a Sakyan son. He is known far and wide as a Buddha, a rightly self-awakened one who is consummate in clear knowing and of pure conduct. He is an expert of worldly affairs, an unsurpassed teacher of those fit to be taught. I have gone forth with dedication to him as my teacher, and it is his Dhamma that I am practicing." Pukkasati has no idea who's in front of him. "Friend Pukkasati, who is the Buddha staying with now?" "Wanderer, I have heard that the Buddha is in Savatthi, which isn't far from there. Have you met the Buddha, and would you recognize him?" "No, I have never met the Buddha, and I would not recognize him." The Buddha now understood Pukasati's devotion. Without identifying himself to Pukasati, he said, I will teach you the Dhamma, friend. Listen and pay close attention as I speak. So Pukasati's thinking, who is this interloper coming in here now? A person has 6 properties, 6 media of sensory contact leading to 18 distinct considerations. That describes a human being, and I'll explain it further, but I just want to read it again. Every human being fits this description. A person, a human being, has 6 properties, 6 media of sensory contact, leading to 18 distinct considerations. The 6 media contact are our 5 physical senses, and the 6th sense are consciousness, ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And so you'll see how the 6th sense base has 3 considerations for each one of the senses, and that's what leads up to that 18 distinct considerations. Furthermore, the Buddha continues, a well-focused Dhamma practitioner establishes 4 wise determinations. That's what it says. Having established these 4 wise determinations, this one has stilled the distraction of fabricated speculation and supposition. When the distraction of fabricated speculation and supposition has stilled, this one is said to be a sage at peace. What the Buddha is referring to about speculation and supposition is we talk about this a lot, any non-physical establishment of the self in some non-physical realm, such as a Buddhist heaven, Christian heaven for that matter, or any type of non-physical establishment of the self, such as what is common, establishing the self in the realm of nothingness or emptiness, 2 things that is very common that the Buddha never taught. And he taught the foolishness of trying to establish yourself in anything other than a human being. The Buddha's Dhamma teaches us how to be a human being and nothing else. And if we want to be something else, guess what? You're rooted in ignorance, because you can't be. Take a look in the mirror. What are you? You're a human being. It does me no good to find out what I might be as a disincarnate being who's being bestowed gifts on some fabricated god or goddess. What I need to know, what I wanted from the first time I realized how confused I was about my life at 12 or 13, was I wanted to know what I was, and I wanted to know what I was in relation to the world. And nothing taught me that until I came across what the Buddha actually taught. All those years in modern Buddhism and my early years in modern Catholicism, I never realized it, but my moment-by-moment life was focused on the reward that I'm getting for being a good Catholic or a good Buddhist. And none of it had to do with what's occurring to me right here and right now. That's what I wanted to learn. And when I found out that's what the Buddha actually taught, it changed everything for me. No speculation or supposition. That has stilled. And when that has stilled, this one is said to be a sage at peace. A well-focused Dhamma practitioner should not neglect wise discernment, should always guard the truth, and should always be devoted to unbinding and train their minds for calm. When we talk about the wisdom of restraint, that's what I'm talking about. Right here, right now, we practice restraint against grasping after what we're not, including an ideology that would establish ourselves in some speculative realm. This is my summary and analysis of these 6 properties. Number 1, this is the Buddha is describing a 6-property person. And notice this applies to every human being. This is all we ever are and all we ever can be. The earth property, the liquid property, the fire property, the wind property, the 4 elements, the space property, because those 4 elements need something to manifest through, doesn't it? That's the space. And an important aspect is this 5th property, because if it wasn't for a space property, we'd have no vehicle to breathe or eat or hear or see or smell. All right, the space property is as essential as any of the other senses. And that's significant, because then we can understand, what am I doing to the space property? It's not just something that is me. I don't have to self-identify with it. It's just like all the other properties. And number 6, the consciousness property. It's interesting to see it that way, to see that my consciousness as a property, and a property is something that is only useful to me if I can take ownership of it, isn't it? So a speculation about who the property I might be in some other lifetime or some other dimension does me no good right here and right now as a human being, does it? I have to be right here, right now, where the Dhamma is practiced. The potential that each moment has within the Dhamma is just that. It's the potential to awaken. It's also the potential to turn our minds or incline our minds towards wisdom and away from ignorance, each and every moment. A person has these 6 properties. Furthermore, a person has 6 media of sensory contact: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the intellect. A person has these 6 media of sensory contact, the 6th sense base. Furthermore, a person has 18 considerations. This is where it gets interesting. On seeing form with the eye, one considers form as a basis for pleasure, or form as a basis for disappointment, or form as a basis for equanimity. That's the choice. That's the only choice. Excuse me. Goggles up for a minute.
Wireless power disconnected.
Thank you. That's the only choice that we have in each and every moment, is to either be a human being or be a fabrication of what a human being could be. And that's what the Buddha Dhamma brings us. I was just checking that you're actually listening to me. Seems like you are. And so in each and every moment of our life, what we're perceiving through the senses is our choice. And we can either see it with equanimity, meaning we don't see any I in it. There's no me in what I'm seeing. And in that way, there's no pleasure and there's no pain. There's just what's occurring. And so if I'm having a wonderful meal with friends, like we just had a few minutes ago, it's a wonderful meal with friends. But I don't have to cling to it or fabricate it or exaggerate it in any way. And I don't have to hope that my next meal is as wonderful as this one was, or that I have the same wonderful friends with me. That's clinging, isn't it? Life as life occurs is simply experienced as it is. And if it's a pleasurable moment, that's fine. If it's a painful moment, that's also fine. And we take a breath, we're present for life as life unfolds, and we move into the next present moment. And if we're doing that with that third option that we have, with the mind of equanimity, guess what? We're an awakened human being. We're living an authentic life. And that's the 18 considerations that we have through each and every one of our senses. And that choice through each and every one of our senses is the same 3: pleasure, pain, or equanimity. Excuse me. Or form as a basis for equanimity. On hearing a sound with the ear, one considers sound as a basis for pleasure, or sound as a basis for disappointment, or sound as a basis for equanimity. On smelling an aroma with the nose, one considers aroma as a basis for pleasure. And I'm going to just go through it. With the nose, with the mouth, tasting flavor with the tongue. On feeling, a tactile sensation with the body. Or on cognizing, let me read that whole thing. On cognizing an idea with the intellect, one considers the idea as a basis for pleasure, or the idea as a basis for disappointment, or the idea as a basis for equanimity. So when I have an idea, and I can't wait to tell you, I know I'm not in equanimity, am I? When I have an idea or a thought about something and it scares me, I know that I'm rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths. I know that I'm no longer in equanimity. What do I do at that point? When I find that my thoughts and my feelings and my senses are delivering nothing but distraction to pleasure or pain.
Take a breath.
Yeah, take a breath, come back in our body, and that is over. Of course, the next moment might be another moment rooted in ignorance, but every single time we unite the mind and the body and live in that right mindfulness of the Eightfold Path, well integrated, we are living as an awakened human being. We're establishing equanimity, even if it's just for a brief moment. It doesn't matter, but it's important to recognize that moment. And as we get caught up in the world, as we become entangled in the world again, we now have the basis, because we've developed the Eightfold Path deep enough and profound enough to recognize when I'm caught up in the world again. And then we start taking responsibility for our moment-by-moment life through recognition. We had a little discussion Saturday about recognition and abandonment, and maybe using a different word, but that's the word. Because when I recognize that I'm stressed out, when I recognize I'm caught up in my head, or caught up in a feeling, or caught up in the world, or caught up in a coronavirus, or caught up in a riot, whatever it is, and now I'm at peace. And I'm at peace because I understand all the things that I just described. All the things that were distracting me, I understand it because I understand 4 noble truths. And when you understand anything, there can be no fear because you understand it. You simply move into the next moment, fully mindful. These are the six considerations that are conducive to pleasure, 6 considerations that are conducive to disappointment, and 6 considerations that are conducive to equanimity. It's always equanimity that's a choice that leads to equanimity. Pleasure, choosing pleasure or choosing pain or reacting is never going to establish equanimity. But the recognition that we have will. A person has these 18 considerations. Furthermore, a wise Dhamma practitioner has 4 determinations. These are what it's really the right word. What am I determining for myself today? What's the most important thing for me, especially right here in a Dhamma class? The determination for discernment, the determination for truth, the determination for relinquishment of all views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, and the determination for calm. That's what we strive for as Dhamma practitioners. And I'm going to read it again, and I'd like you all to just consider, is this at all impossible? The determination for discernment, right view. The determination for truth, Four Noble Truths. The determination for relinquishment, letting go of all views ignorant of Four Noble Truths, and determination from calm. Does anyone think that that's not achievable? Anyone? No? It's not. A wise Dhamma practitioner has these 4 determinations. That's our Dhamma practice. A Dhamma practitioner should not neglect discernment, should guard the truth, Four Noble Truths, be devoted to relinquishment, and train only for calm. What a powerful line. All the different trainings that I had over many, many years, learning the proper bow, or the proper chant, or the proper visualization, or the proper this, the proper that, not one person ever told me you should be devoted to calm. And it wasn't until I came across the Buddha's Dhamma, and I was encouraged by him. And I talked a little bit about this, and this is kind of a similar sutta. After reading all these suttas, Siddhartha Gautama has become almost like a brother to me. Certainly someone that I can say I know very well through his teachings. And he comes across just this way. He's playful, but he's also determined. He in all the suttas that I've read, I've never come across one wasted word, even through my own translations, my own restoration of it. And it's really remarkable. He was always on point. Always on point. And this is just another good example of that. Train only for calm. So when we might be, especially beginning practice, when we're sitting down and trying to figure out what am I doing here in Dhamma practice, this sutta tells you just what you're doing here. And how does one not neglect discernment? Through mindfulness of these 6 properties. Practicing restraint. Remember all those suttas we went through, practicing restraint at the 6th sense base. The 6th sense base is the interface between my inner self and my outer self. It's the interface between what hopefully is a calm and peaceful mind and the entanglements of the world. It is at the point of contact that we practice the Dhamma, and it's only at the point of contact that we can practice the Dhamma. There's no Dhamma in the past, there can be no Dhamma in the future. But every time we unite the mind and our body, take a breath, and look at what's occurring from the point of view of even developing right view, now we are developing our minds towards awakening. We're inclining our minds towards awakening at the only point that it can be, at the point of contact. And what is the earth property? The earth property can be internal or external. Internal earth property is anything within oneself that is hard, solid, and sustained by craving, hanging on to it. Head, hair, body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, tendons, bones, marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, membrane, spleen, lungs, intestines, contents of the stomach, feces, and anything else internal within oneself that's hard, solid, and sustained by craving. What does the Buddha mean by sustained by craving? It's sustained by craving, it's the image of myself that is prone to all these physical properties, that is sustained by craving for views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths that establish me as this physical self. That's what the Buddha is referring to. This is called the internal earth property. Both internal and external earth properties, both internal earth property and external earth property are simply earth property. Another very important line that's a key to the entire sutta, all the suttas, a key to the entire Dhamma. The internal earth property and the external earth property is simply earth property. Ram, what's he referring to there?
Internal, external.
I just wanted to break from talking, that's why. You want a shot, or should I? We've mentioned it a little bit earlier.
Yes. There is nothing imaginary there.
Yes, that's exactly it. Now remember, the Buddha is talking to a group of people that fell into the same speculative beliefs that we've been carrying around for 2,600 years ago that are still professed today. And so the Buddha understood that most of their so-called spiritual practice is about what a human being isn't, a non-physical establishment in some type of realm, whether it's a reward or just almost an accident because you didn't do Buddhism right. Well, the Buddha said that self-establishment, that fabricated speculative way of looking at the world is simply earth property. There's nothing special about creating these fabricated self-establishments outside of a human existence. They're all just earth property. It's all one thing. Okay, it's important. Internal and external properties are simply one property. That was my comment that I'm reading there. I just set it for emphasis. This is how the the Buddha's words, this is how the earth property should be seen by one with right discernment or right view. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. When one sees this as it has come to be with right discernment or right view, one becomes disenchanted with the earth property. And through lacking of sustenance, through lack of sustenance, the earth property fades from the mind. So that's what we do. There's nothing else we have to do, is to simply recognize where our fabrications are clinging us to, recognize the fabrication of it, become disenchanted with it through knowledge, through understanding, and it simply fades away. So how do we awaken? By letting all of our fabrications fade away. That's it. And we do that by direct engagement with the Dhamma.
This is a place where he doesn't use the standard phrasing of disenchantment to dispassion to release, but it's still saying the same thing.
Still saying the same thing. And again, someone who's heard this knows that's where he's going to. And the truth is, he may have said it in this sutta, and the 100 translations still here. Yeah. But that's the importance of, that I found when I restored the suttas is you have to get the essence and you have to relate it to what the Buddha actually awakened to. And the magical and mystical fabrications are easy to put aside because the Buddha didn't teach that. And it's obvious when you read suttas like this, that of course you didn't teach anything magical or mystical, or this would be nonsense.
It really is just another twist of what last week was.
Mm-hmm. It is. With that little bit of a twist. This is what a person actually is. And through lack of sustenance, the earth property fades from mind. That's what I meant. Sustenance is what? Sustenance is craving for and clinging to those fabricated beliefs. That's what sustenance is. The Buddha often, there's some sutras where the Buddha talks about cutting off the food of ignorance, and that's what he means. We maintain ignorance through our own thinking, don't we? And that's that subtle and pervasive aspect of ignorance that causes us to ignore it. And then we create all these very powerful and subtle strategies to continue to ignore our own ignorance. And for those with spiritual bents, we do it through spiritual disciplines. We create these fabricated views. The Buddha continues. And what is a liquid property? A liquid property can be internal or external. The internal liquid property is anything belonging to oneself that is liquid, watery, and sustained by craving: bile, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, oil, saliva, mucus, urine, and anything else internal within oneself that is liquid, watery, and sustained by craving. There's that line again. This is called internal liquid property. Both internal and external liquid property are simply liquid property. This is how the liquid property should be seen by one with right discernment. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not what I am. This is not myself. The Buddha says that throughout the sutta, and we learn that over and over again. Whenever we identify ourselves with anything, we remind ourselves, this is not me. This is not mine. That's the essence of I-making when we do it, and it's the essence of developing the Dhamma by recognizing I-making and abandoning it immediately. When one sees this as it has come to be with right discernment, one becomes disenchanted with the liquid property, and through lack of sustenance, the liquid property fades from the mind. I'm going to skip over fire. The Buddha says that with the other properties, exactly the same thing. I just want to get to the...
John, when he says the earth property, liquid property fades from the mind, does that mean that self-identification with the hair, the teeth, the fat, the bile, the blood, all of those things as me?
Good point, yes.
Fades from the mind.
Yep. And so you think about how self-conscious we become at times, and some people it really rises to the level of pathology, how they look to people, and it's a constant distraction when you think that way, don't you? And so as we develop as we disentangle ourselves from that self-identification with even something as hair, or not having fake teeth, that's all self-identification, and it causes stress. But when I understand it in its broad and subtle application that the Buddha, that's why he mentions all these things, feces, etc. Just to make the point, excuse me for using something unpleasant, but I can't get diarrhea, can I? But the earth property can. And when I see it that way, I don't have to take it personally. In other words, I don't have to blame someone or blame a bad... It's just what's occurring in my life. And when this is done in I'm using kind of somewhat subtle, silly examples, but when it's done on a moment-by-moment basis, that mind of equanimity prevails no matter what's occurring. And so whether you got diarrhea or the world's blowing up, your mind is calm and at peace. If someone's in your face, screaming whatever they might be screaming at you today, you remain calm and at peace. When you hear someone, not going to get too deep into it. When you hear a white cop kill a black man, you don't have to hate the white man, the white cop, because you understand his ignorance. You learn the difference between approval and acceptance. You accept something because it's what occurred, but I don't have to approve it. Approval is self-referential, isn't it? Approving something is rooted in I-making. Acceptance, calm, peaceful acceptance rooted in equanimity, is what an awakened, fully mature human being does, no matter what's occurring. Made the point. Thank you, man. I'll start here. And what is the space property? The space property can be internal or external. The internal space property is anything belonging to oneself that is spatial, and sustained by craving. The internal space property is the holes of the ears, the nostrils, the mouth, the throat passage, whereby what is eaten, drunk, consumed, and tasted gets swallowed, and where it collects, and whereby it is excreted from the body, or anything else internal within oneself that is spatial, and sustained. This is called the internal space property. Both the internal and external space property are simply space property. This is how the space property should be seen by one with right discernment. This is not me, this is not mine, this is not what I am. This is not myself. When one sees this as it has come to be with right discernment, one becomes disenchanted with the space property, and through lack of sustenance, the space property fades from mind. It fades from the mind. It doesn't fade from existence, so that's another important point. Again, the Buddha didn't teach anything like an annihilation of self. He really taught what Maxwell Maltz would have said is true self-actualization. This is really what a self is, and it's not a fabricated self based on feelings or thoughts or theories about what a self is. It's a real experience, a hepasiko. This is what it means to be a human being. And it changes everything. It makes each and every moment of life be meaningful no matter what it is. Why? Because you're living it as a human being. In fact, that's the only way that life can really be meaningful, is to actually live it mindfully, right through refined mindfulness. And what is the consciousness property? Consciousness consciousness free of fabrication remains pure and bright. What is perceived by consciousness? One perceives pleasure, one perceives pain, one perceives neither pleasure nor pain. In dependence on sensory contact, that is to be felt as pleasure, there arises a feeling of pleasure. When I first read, I can still remember reading that line. And I wasn't drunk, but I almost fell out of my chair. In dependence on sensory contact, that is to be felt as pleasure, there arises a feeling of pleasure. The intention is what's so interesting there, isn't it? In order for me to have pleasure, there's an anticipation about that pleasure, isn't there? Even if it's a hopeful anticipation, meaning coming up against a new experience that I have no reference for, but internally I hope this is a mind-blowing, I hope this is a peak, Maxwell Knoll, a peak experience I'm after. I want to have a peak experience. It's a fabrication, isn't it? And as a Buddha will say next, so is anticipating pain. I'm going to meet that SOB again, and he's probably going to be just as mean as he was before. That's what the Buddha's talking about. I'm carrying experiences around in my mind that have no basis in reality. And yet we do it all the time. That's living a fabricated life. That's living a stress-induced life for my own lack of understanding. I have to read that whole thing again to make sense. In dependence on sensory contact, that is to be felt as pleasure, there arises a feeling of pleasure due to the self-identification. One perceives, I am sensing a feeling of pleasure. It's up to me to decide that. And even though it's my decision that I'm having a pleasurable experience is entirely arbitrary and based on my view. And I'll give you the best example I can. And you all know what it is. When you're swallowing bottles of cheap vodka every day, there's nothing pleasurable about it, yet you think it is. In fact, you think you need to do it in order to be happy. That's what drove me every day of my life, drinking myself to death, literally on a daily basis. And I actually came very close twice. If I kept going, I wouldn't be here today to teach you this wonderful Dhamma. Yet, even at that point in my life, I thought I was gaining pleasure from it. When I think about that now, I can't believe how utterly insane I was. And yet anybody who's had addiction knows that's the most reasonable thought in the world. Let me just, and as I never had a gentlemanly drink in my life, never. And yet my thought was, I'm going to sit down and have a cocktail because I deserve it. Usually that cocktail was laying on the floor in some type of bodily fluid that shouldn't be there. And yet in my mind, I'm still thinking, I'm going to have a nice gentlemanly drink because I deserve it. And I'm exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. I'm going on and on about this because this is how we do. All human beings do this, not necessarily with drugs and alcohol, but with food, sex, golf. The food, if there's still shopping networks, I don't know if there are, but we do it with anything. The compulsion to maintain ignorance is what drives every human being's moment by moment life. And that doesn't mean they're not successful. It doesn't mean they don't enjoy a sunset or something else. But they're not living their life because they're distracted by what's occurring rather than being present through right discernment. So there's nothing wrong with enjoying life, and there's nothing wrong with making decisions to avoid things that are unpleasant, such as fixing the roof on your house. That's not rooted in ignorance. It's a practical thing to do. But if you take it personally, you're in trouble. That's all. An awakened human being would be very difficult to tell from an unawakened human being, except as they're sitting in front of them, because of the way they carry themselves. An awakened human being would not necessarily look like that, would they? In fact, they might look pretty boring to you or to the average person because there's nothing going on. Absolutely nothing going on. And that's common peace. That's equanimity. There's nothing going on. I'm just here. I'm just living my life as I'm meant to live it. Buddha continues. In dependence on sensory contact that is to be felt as pain, there arises a feeling of pain due to self-identification. One perceives, I am sensing a feeling of pain. We all do that. How you doing today? I'm not feeling so good. It's really not a description, is it? In dependence on sensory contact that is to be felt as neither pleasure nor pain, there arises a feeling of neither pleasure nor pain. Now we're not talking of ambiguity. We're talking about the common boredom of most human beings. And this is when this arises during meditation. This is what drives people off their cushion. This feeling of boredom. And what is a feeling of boredom? It's the immediate need for sensory stimulation right here, right now. That's what boredom arises from. That's what the Buddha is referring to here. A feeling of neither pleasure nor pain, this feeling of ambiguity, is very agitating to a mind that's constantly seeking distraction. How many, I bet you all of you felt this way when you first started meditating. Just sitting quietly for a couple of minutes seemed like the most impossible thing to do, didn't it? And it's still surprising to me when I think about adult human beings. You tell them to sit quietly and don't do anything but be mindful of your breath. And 2 minutes of that, and they're literally losing their minds over it. And me, I was the same way. How can it be that an adult human being can't just sit quietly? But we can't, because we're so addicted to constant sensory stimulation, to constant distraction, due to self-identification. One perceives, I am seeing neither pleasure nor pain. Through refined mindfulness, one understands that with the cessation of self-identification of that very sensory contact, the feeling of pleasure has arisen independently of that contact. Independently of that contact. What is to be felt as pleasure ceases. Wait a minute. Can't read the word. I just had difficulty focusing on it. Let me read it again. Of that very sensory contact, the feeling of pleasure has arisen independently of that contact. What is to be felt as pleasure ceases, is stilled through restraint and a lack of self-reference. That's describing Dhamma practice right there. Through refined mindfulness, one understands that with the cessation of self-identification of that very sensory contact, the feeling of pleasure has arisen independently of it. What's the Buddha? I'll give you another shot. What does the Buddha mean there, Rob?
Well, actually, I was reading the Sutta earlier, and my mind went, whoa, hold on for a second. What happened to dependent origination? But that's not where he's going with this.
The feeling of pleasure arose independently of contact.
Because it was dependent not on contact, but it was dependent on our identification.
Take the dependence out of it.
Fabricated thing.
We're getting there. Arisen independently of contact. What is the sutta talks about contact rooted in ignorance, the six media. Once that ignorance is over, the pleasure that is arising independently of a fabricated view. It's simply reality. It's simply what's occurring. There's no fabrication in what's arising, and because I'm not judging it one way or the other. Again, it's such an important line, because many people, when they first come to the Dhamma, they perceive the ramifications as the ending of all possible pleasure. What's going to happen to me if I let go of all these fabricated views? And it's just the opposite, because each and every moment becomes a pleasurable moment, not because of what I'm getting out of it, because I'm actually living it. And you could say that even things that are painful have an air of pleasure because of the understanding that goes along with it. And that's what the Buddha is referring to. Independently of any view that I have, I can enjoy pleasure without becoming entangled in it. And the same is true for the other.
So it is actually it's the negation of dependent origination. This is where
it's beyond dependent origination.
It's
yes.
Beyond, because we're no longer in ignorance.
Yep. And since we're no longer in ignorance, there's nothing to give rise to another moment rooted in ignorance and another moment that would provoke stress and suffering. That's the whole Buddha Dhamma. That's all he's concerned about, which is quite a lot, isn't it? David, you had a comment?
Just free of clinging. It's just pleasure.
Yep.
And that's where I think people do get a little discouraged because they think they can enjoy things over practice.
Yeah. Yep. And then even the things that you would have run away from before become, they become an opportunity to live. We don't exclude things. That's the Buddha taught, and he recognized that we are giving our lives away, literally from birth to death, because there's aspects of life we don't want to have. And the Buddha recognized that, and he said, wait a minute, if you want to live your life, we'll say you got to take the good and the bad. And you can do it with equanimity. You don't have to keep running away from it. Kevin, you got your hands up?
No, that's what I was going to say.
I took...
Equanimity arises... Equanimity arises from release of wrong view, from release of the fabrication. As practice deepens, that's the authentic. That's where you see it. You see that by attaching to a worldly phenomenon, that's where you're at dis-ease. You're not calm anymore because you're wanting it to be different, opposed to realizing that it's arising and passing away just like your breath.
Yeah, and so even then, pleasure is a distraction, isn't it? It's not something that we would want because it's taking us out of our body. So even the things that we chase after our whole lives are ultimately, and that's why the Buddha's Dhamma works in this way, because all of it is fodder for pain and suffering. Larry, you had a question?
No, I don't know if this is what the Buddha said, but I heard it once said, and it's rising to my level of thinking here as you're telling that is there a suffering and the end of suffering, and they're one and the same?
No, they're not. The end of suffering is the end of suffering is awakening. Living in ignorance is suffering. So they really are two different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just sounds like that's what we're talking about here. Is this? That's all it is.
Yeah. The only thing that we're really dealing with in the Dhamma, but it's everything, is what is it. Let me say it this way. You've heard me say a few times that the Buddha could have nearly as accurately described the first noble truth as there is dukkha, as saying there is distraction. There is distraction, because it is the ongoing preoccupation with stress and suffering that distracts us from our life. We're always out of this moment, anticipating what I might be getting or what might be coming my way, or I simply need neither pleasure nor pain. I need excitement right here and right now. I can't stand nothing going on. So let me create something. And so all of that is suffering. But we have to remember that the Buddha didn't... The basis of the Buddha's Dhamma is recognizing and abandoning ignorance. Ignorance manifests through stress and suffering. But we can also say that stress and suffering is also things that give us pleasure because they're distracting and we create identities over it. So in that sense, it is all one thing. But what we're learning to understand is that suffering is an option for me. I don't have to react to it. 3 classes ago, we did the Anatta Sutta, which describes that inherent in having a human life, there's going to be stress and suffering. The Buddha described that as sickness, aging, and death. Every human being, that every person has a human life, is prone to sickness, aging, and death. We're prone to not getting what we want. We're prone to getting what we don't want. That's the Buddha's description of stress and suffering. Why is that so significant? It's because we want to ignore that. We make all of that a game rather than realize that's a distraction away from our own life.
Right. It's almost as if the Buddha is pointing us towards, like the truth of happiness is independent from contact. It is.
It's being fully disentangled from the world, which most people don't want anything to do with. And until you understand why, You know, again, that's why if you're going to develop the Buddha's Dhamma, you first have to encounter it, and you have to encounter it in the right way, the way it's presented. Because if not, you're never going to get there. You'll be practicing something else.
Search.
Yeah, ignoble searches. The Buddha continues, through refined mindfulness. Refined mindfulness is, another word the Buddha uses, right mindfulness, but it's a clear distinction between ordinary mindfulness that we're taught today. The Buddha's mindfulness is to be mindful of the Eightfold Path and not applied anywhere else. And it's through that mindfulness that we're able to be mindful when we're washing the dishes or mindful when we're walking around, et cetera, et cetera. Very specific, refined mindfulness, holding in mind the Eightfold Path. Through refined mindfulness, one understands that with the cessation of self-identification of that very sensory contact, the feeling of pain has arisen independently of that contact. What is to be felt as pain ceases and is stilled. Through refined mindfulness, one understands that with the cessation of self-identification with that very sensory contact, the feeling of neither pleasure nor pain has arisen independently of that contact. What is to be felt as neither pleasure nor pain ceases and it's still. It simply means it's not creating a disturbance in my mind. Just as when two sticks are brought together and agitated, heat and fire are born dependent on contact and agitation. If you just touch the sticks together, nothing's going on. When the sticks are separated and the agitation ceases, heat subsides and the fire is extinguished. It's a beautiful metaphor for awakening. But we're the ones that keep rubbing the sticks together. We rub our own sticks together. We keep ourselves agitated. We keep ourselves inflamed with the fires of passion until we finally have enough and we develop the Dhamma and we take a breath and we stop. And it's just that easy. Well, I should say it's just that direct. Not that easy but it is that. You know, we keep this going. It's up to us to keep it going. It takes tremendous amount of energy, and now what medical science has finally looked at in the last 30 years, that's called stress. Maintaining ignorance, maintaining a fabricated view of self is incredibly stressful, and we don't have to do it.
So, John, in regards to like aging, pain, dying, it just allows you to be at ease with it because it's not attached to.
Yeah. It's, you know, I don't often use myself as an example, but I fit. I don't want to go, I don't want it to sound like I'm the most suffering person in the world, but I have a lot of things that are not good with me. I can't walk much more. I can't see. I have a terrific amount of pain in my legs. So I don't sleep well. And again, I'm not trying to make, but from my point of view, I'm feeling everything I'm feeling, but it's so damn interesting to see what I come up with to keep doing this. And some of it's practical. Sometimes it's a call to a friend when I need help. But in a completely non-narcissistic way, my life is more interesting to me than it's ever been, and part of it has to do with what I'm going through physically. But if I wasn't, it would be something else. And it's not. This is just my life, and everybody can live that life no matter what's occurring. Whether you're coming to the end like me or you're 25 years old, the key to all of it is to be present for it, because that's the only way you can actually have any meaning about it. So, you know, I could say, boy, I wish I was awakened when I was 25 because it would have been, but that's nonsense. That's ridiculous to even have that thought. That's a thought that's rooted in ignorance, isn't it? The thought that is most pleasurable to me is I'm here. I'm here. And I say that a lot. I say it to myself because it's almost like pinching myself. I'm waking from a dream. Because that when I was 13, 14 years old, 15 years old, and frustrated and confused and angry at everything and drinking and drugging and all the rest of the things that I was doing, was not to make it too simple, but it's because I didn't know what was going on. I was so confused. I was so frustrated. I was so afraid. And I was afraid because I didn't know. And now I'm not, you know, and again, every moment in my life is so meaningful. And maybe that's why I keep doing this. Because I think you're all developing, aren't you? I mean, haven't you all found more meaning in life through the Buddhist Dhamma? Mm-hmm. Yes, no?
Yes.
Online, yes, no? And that's the point. I mean, why? To me, why do anything? You know, forget a so-called philosophical or spiritual religious practice. Why do anything if it doesn't ultimately deliver what you're looking for? And this is the first thing that did. Michael? And by the way, if you have your hand up and I'm not calling out, just holler out because I might not see you.
Well, to say that your engineer is speculative, okay?
Yeah,
Right?
it is.
So let's see, we didn't know that. So anyhow. So,
I can see the future.
actually, that was actually kind of, it was nice of you to impart that to us, to give us understanding about your physical condition. But now let me ask you a question, okay? So, obviously, 5 clinging aggregates right there in front of us.
Yes.
So, have you become
Wireless power
disenchanted
disconnected.
and dispassionate in relation to the condition, this human condition that we're in?
Have I become dispassionate about it?
Disenchanted and dispassionate.
You mean for myself personally?
Yes.
Yes. I don't need myself to be any different than I am. You know, and that you know, if I could say it finally sunk in, but and again, you don't have to be 64 and kind of beat up to have this. You know, that's why I asked that question. You all have said you've had this experience. You know, just being mindfully present with life as life occurs is another way of saying that's the Dhamma. But what more could we want? You know, they suggest you can't take anything with you. It's true, isn't it?
Wireless power connected.
So, and again, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have things. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with being the wealthiest person in the world as long as you don't have to be. And there's nothing terribly wrong about being the poorest person unless it bothers you. You know, because none of that has anything to do with being a human being. It has to do, you know, if you find yourself as the richest person in the world, how you live your moment by moment life is most important. The same is true for the poorest person. The same is true for the average person. The same is true for every human being. Our moment by moment, let me say it this way, the quality of our mind, moment by moment, is what's important. And it's the only thing that's important, isn't it? I wanted things to be different when I was 15 years old because of the anguish that my mind was in. I thought it was through external means. I thought that I could do this or do that, you know, whatever it might be, go to college, find the right girl, et cetera, And I did all those things. And I was miserable. You know, when I was late 20s, early 30s, I was married. I had a beautiful woman. Not that that matters, but it did at the time to me. I had a business that was just going great. I was making a ton of money, and I was miserable, and I couldn't figure it out. I mean, I was literally just miserable. I was living the American dream, and I didn't figure it out then. It was 10 years later that I finally realized that I was accumulating the things that I thought I should accumulate as a successful man in America, and they were all disappointing, every single one of them. And I think it might not have been disappointing if I didn't have to own them. You know, if I didn't have to, they weren't all self-reflective. Because when your identity, when your wife is your identity, everything she does is going to be wrong, because you need her to be you rather than thinking that I actually love this. I don't know if I'm explaining that well. We tend to see, for mind rooted in ignorance, we tend to see what we want of ourselves through other people. And so we bring people into our lives hoping that there'd be a little bit more of me. And so we're always disappointed in that until we change that point of view. And the same was true about my business and everything else. Life was just disappointing until this. And now it's not. And now when there's no big business, there's no, wife, none of the things that I used to have. And every moment is meaningful. I guess you could say that for me, I'm the test of the Dhamma. Does it really work? And everybody should feel this way, because if I can do it, if I can do it, anybody can do it. I really believe that. But if it doesn't, the Dhamma working for Larry doesn't do anything for me, does it? Or Matt or anybody else. It works for me. I found something that works for me, and I think it's working for other people, and that's what's important. It's not that it's not that I'm a follower of Siddhartha Gautama or a Buddhist or anything. I found a way of living in the world that is remarkably peaceful no matter what occurs. And that's what I always wanted to make.
A common thread through all this would be simply state that acceptance of what is.
Yep. That the Buddha was simply the most radically accepting person there ever was.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned through the Dhamma, I said it once before, the significant difference between acceptance and approval. Egos approve. Mature people accept. It's really that simple.
Yeah. John,
Yes.
but is it, you said, but you don't have any of those things, you don't have the big business, you don't have the different things in your life, and now you've awakened. But it's possible, I mean, obviously it's possible to awaken and have all those things.
Yes.
Just not being attached to them.
Yes. In my case, they're not here anymore, and it doesn't seem to matter. But that doesn't mean, but to think that you have to give up everything in order to be awakened is also a fabrication.
Right.
And you're going to, and it's painful. It's anything you do that's rooted in I-making. Let me make this big sacrifice. I'm going to take all of my gold and throw it in the bottom of the ocean, and look how awakened I'll be then. Well, you're not going to be, and you're not going to have any food for breakfast tomorrow either. So again, the Buddhist Dhamma is the most practical teaching ever too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess you could think, well, maybe I should be like my teacher and hope to get a little sick and give away everything. No. What you should do is to live your life as a human being, and whatever is there, and whatever is not, and don't create identities over it. That's all. So it doesn't matter what we have and what we don't have as true wise Dhamma practitioners. It's what we do with it. In this same manner, an agitated mind, lacking concentration, in dependence on contact, will feel feelings of pleasure or feelings of pain or feelings of neither pleasure nor pain. A wise Dhamma practitioner understands that with a cessation of self-referential sensory contact, feelings of pleasure or pain or neither pleasure nor pain are still. That's a calm and peaceful mind. Now there remains only a mind established in equanimity, luminous, pure, supple, and spacious. Just as if a skillful goldsmith were to take raw gold and through skillful effort transform this raw gold into a refined and flawless ornament, malleable and luminous. The gold would now suit the goldsmith's purpose. Again, beautiful metaphor. We can make our minds anything we want with the right tools, with the Eightfold Path. We can make it be any, in fact, not even with the Eightfold Path. We always make our minds be anything that we want. We just don't understand that we can make it something better. In this same manner, one whose mind is established in equanimity, luminous, pure, supple, and spacious, knows that if I were to direct my thinking toward non-physical dimensions of infinite consciousness or infinite space or infinite emptiness or nothingness or the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception, I would know these distracted mind states as fabricated. Again, one of the most powerful, this should be, that line should be on the first page of every Buddhist book and every Buddhist website, because it would get people to realize that their Dhamma practice is simply more of a distraction. A wise Dhamma practitioner does not fabricate or mentally construct for the sake of self-establishment in this physical realm or any fabricated or imaginary non-physical realm. Fabrication is abandoned. This one is not sustained through craving. This one is released from clinging to anything in the world, letting go of all those speculative views. Released from views ignorant of Four Noble Truths, this one is no longer agitated. Their mind is calm and well concentrated. This one knows their mind is calm and well concentrated. This one knows birth is now ended. The life well integrated with the Eightfold Path has been lived. My task is now complete. There is nothing further in this world. Meaning there's no amount of ignorance left within him to give birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. We'll conclude with this. Friend Pukasati, when sensing a feeling of pleasure, understand it as impersonal and as such impermanent. Understanding thus, craving and clinging vanish. Likewise, when sensing a feeling of pain or sensing a feeling of neither pleasure nor pain, understand these feelings are impersonal and as such impermanent. Understanding thus, craving and clinging vanish. Understanding brings the awareness that pleasure, pain, and neither pleasure nor pain are all impersonal, and as such, they're all impermanent. They are not craved after or self-identified with. When feeling pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, a wise Dhamma practitioner remains disjoined through lack of self-identification from these feelings. This one understands feelings in the body are limited to the body. This is again another teaching on not speculating about where you are. This one understands feelings limited to human life are limited to human life. This one understands that with the ending of life and the breakup of the body, that all that is experienced and not joined to will grow cold and end right there. So another good teaching on you better get it right. Just as an oil lamp burns in dependence on wick and oil, from termination of wick and oil, it would be unnourished and cease. In the same manner, when a wise Dhamma practitioner is feeling a feeling limited to the body, they understand I am sensing a feeling that is limited to the body. It's just what's occurring. There's nothing extraordinary about any feeling. How could it be? It's just a feeling. When a wise Dhamma practitioner is feeling a feeling limited to human life, they understand I am sensing a feeling limited to human life. Another powerful line. So no matter what is occurring to us, no matter how painful it might be, it's simply an aspect of having a human life. And there's nothing unique about it, is there?
Yeah, it's impermanent.
It's impermanent, and no matter what it is, it's entirely ordinary. It's an ordinary in the sense that it's part of having a human life. Suffering occurs. Thanks, Larry. This wise Dhamma practitioner understands that with the ending of life and the breakup of the body, that all that is experienced and not joined with will grow cold and end right there. In this manner, when one has the highest determination for understanding, for the knowledge of the arising and passing away of suffering and stress, this one has achieved the greatest noble understanding. This Dhamma practitioner has gained release from all views ignorant of Four Noble Truths. Their mind has established right view, now resting in pure truth. This view will no longer fabricate due to distraction. This one knows whatever is deceptive and remains free from associating with deception. I read that wrong. This one knows whatever is deceptive, and they remain free from associating with deception. This Dhamma practitioner is established with the highest determination for truth. This is the foremost unbinding from wrong views and is the highest noble truth. Formerly, when still ignorant of Four Noble Truths, this Dhamma practitioner, Buddha is talking about himself now, foolishly craved after mental acquisitions and created self-identities clinging to these mental acquisitions. This Dhamma practitioner has completely abandoned them through the Eightfold Path. This one has cut all fabrications off at the root of ignorance. How could we be confused about what the Buddha's path is? Like the stump of a palmyra tree, now deprived of the conditions of sustenance, fabrications no longer arise. Likewise, when still ignorant of Four Noble Truths, this Dhamma practitioner foolishly was driven by desire and self-infatuation, by ill will and hatred, by delusion and ignorance, and created self-identities clinging to these unskillful qualities. Now, this Dhamma practitioner has completely abandoned them. Through the Eightfold Path, this one has cut fabrications off at the root of ignorance. Like the stump of a palmyra tree, now deprived of the conditions of sustenance, fabrications will no longer arise. This Dhamma practitioner has established the highest determination for calm, for the calming of greed, aversion, and deluded thinking, the three defilements. This one has established the highest noble calm. This Dhamma practitioner knows to never neglect right view, to always guard the truth, and to always train for establishing a calm and well-concentrated mind. This Dhamma practitioner understands where, through wise restraint, the currents of speculation and supposition do not flow. This one is known as a sage at peace. With reference to what I'm saying to you, all of the following is speculation and supposition. Listen to this. All of this is speculation and supposition. I am this. I will be. I will not be. I will have this form. I will not have this form. I will have psychic powers. I will not have psychic powers. Most of modern Buddhism uses a qualifier for awakening as you will know all of your psychic powers will be part of your awakening process. What the Buddha said. In fact, he said it over and over again. Don't go there. It's a lot of nonsense. There's nothing psychic about it being a human being. I will have psychic powers. I will not have psychic powers. Speculation and supposition are diseases. They're a cancer, an arrow. By abandoning all speculation and supposition, this Dhamma practitioner is known as a sage at peace. A sage at peace is no longer distracted or agitated by birth, aging, sickness, death, sorrow, regret, greed, aversion, or deluded thinking. With no distraction or agitation, what would this Dhamma practitioner crave for or cling to? This Dhamma practitioner understands where the currents of speculation and supposition do not flow. When through wise restraint the currents of speculation and supposition do not flow, this one is known as a sage at peace. Now, friend Pukasati, you should remember my brief analysis of the 6 properties. Then the thought occurred to Venerable Pukasati, surely the great teacher has come to me. Surely the rightly self-awakened one has come to me. Pukasati rose and bowed to the Buddha and said, I was foolish, confused, and unskilled to address you merely as a friend. Please accept my apology so that I may restrain myself in the future. The Buddha replied, yes, confusion overcame you. But most importantly, you have recognized your confusion in accordance with my Dhamma and have made a strong determination to end your confusion. It is just by this determination and discipline that one grows in the Dhamma and practices restraint in the future. Great teacher, please accept me into the order to follow your Dhamma. The Buddha says, do you have an alms bowl and robes? No, replied Pukasati. Then gather a bowl and robes and I will give you the going forth. And this was not a big deal. Going forth simply meant you were accepted into the original sangha. Pukasati was delighted. He bowed to the Buddha and left in search of an alms bowl and robes for his orientation. While searching, a runaway cow trampled and killed Pukasati. A large group from the sangha found the Buddha and told him of Pukasati's demise. They asked the Buddha what Pukasati's future state would be. They're still speculating, aren't they? Listen to the Buddha's response. Friends, Pukasati was wise. He practiced the Dhamma in accordance with my instruction. He never pestered me with unrelated issues. He has abandoned the 5 fetters of self-identification, grasping at rituals and practices, doubt and uncertainty, sensual craving, and deluded thinking. He is now free of fabricated views and will never again be subject to the suffering born of ignorance. Those that heard the words of the Buddha were delighted. The end of the sutta. Okay. 6 property person. Let's go online. I'll start with Lorna, but give me a second. I got to get rid of this, whatever this is here. Okay. Lorna, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'll just sit on my cushion tonight, please.
Okay, I'm glad you joined us.
Okay, thank you.
Jane, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm in the process of moving, and I had this really large square grand piano in my living room, and I tried to find a home for it. It's really beautiful. It's over 120 years old, but I couldn't find a home for it. So this morning I had to call Mr. Junk, and he came and he dismantled it and threw it into the dumpster very unceremoniously. And now I'm looking at the space where this piano was for 40 years. And I realized that, well, the new owners are going to be putting something else in that space. And I realized, you know, I look at it, even though I have more properties than the piano had, I mean, you know, I have the same impermanence. Yeah. One day, you know, I'll be gone and there'll be something else in my space.
Yep.
And the really nice part about this is I'm very at peace with that thought.
Isn't that wonderful?
Isn't it? So it's just happening right now.
Thank you, Jane. Excuse me, I don't know if you've heard, but we're thinking of going up to Wan Dharma Center sometime at the end of July or early August, just for kind of an informal Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'll let you know, and if you're interested, you can join us.
I'm in.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, we just got to come up with it. Where's Matt? We got to come up with a date and just do it. So, thank you, Jane. Good evening, Josh. Hello, Josh.
Hi, John.
There you are. How do I look?
Well, I don't dare say it's an improvement, but
I knew you'd give us something good. Thank you, Josh.
well, I am just I'm a little concerned because I think I'm getting some of this stuff.
You should be. It'll never be the same again.
When I hear this, I just become over and over again aware of how addicted to distraction I am. Just about all my thoughts are based upon, through the day, are based upon fabricated thoughts about what's going to make me happy or unhappy, or should I worry about this or not worry about that, and so forth. And I really got what you said tonight. It was a wonderful teaching, and going to give me a lot of food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And for you to understand the sutta shows that all your right effort in the last 6 months or so has really paid off, because it is a kind of a deep sutta, but you get it. Glad you joined us tonight. Matt, there you are.
Hey, John. Hey, everybody. Good to see everybody here. Everybody's here.
Good to see your pleasant face again.
Thanks.
In a while.
This sutta is very deep and profound, as you mentioned. There's a lot of layers to this. And one thing I keep coming back to and thinking as we listened to this tonight was from another sutta, we talked about where, it was from the Loka Sutta, when we talked about where there's desire, there's fear.
Yeah.
And then I think about that in relation to not rubbing the sticks together. And how, what would life be like if I just didn't rub the sticks together? And where that the desire to have a fire or just the process of rubbing the sticks together, that metaphor is just really strong.
I'm listening to you, Matt.
It's something that I'm going to be holding a little bit and working on. That really struck me tonight. That the Buddha's metaphor about rubbing the sticks together. When you take the sticks away from each other, all of the stress, conflict, agitation, desire, and fear go away.
Wireless power disconnected.
So that's just something I'm going to think about a lot.
Yeah. And then you're that's the essence of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. You're questioning us, aren't you? Hello, Ram. Where are you?
Hey, John. Thanks for bringing this sutta back again. Yeah, we really should read this one at least once a year, if not twice.
Yeah.
To just pounded back in there. We, we are just ordinary six father.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing, and everything on top of that should be discarded, and we should accept life as it rolls along.
Yeah.
You just can't hear it often enough.
I agree. It's a great sutta. Let's see where we are. Go to Julia. How are you? There you are.
Hi, John. I agree. This is a very profound sutta, and the thing that I liked was when it said that pleasure has arisen independently of that contact, because it makes you realize that we're just human. We're here. We're experiencing all phenomena that are coming in.
Yep.
Yes, there will be pleasurable ones and ones that we will not like, but it's not the point of labeling them pleasurable or non-pleasurable. It's the fact that we accept it and not make it something that we would become as part of us, like self-referential. Cling to those things so that we can become further ignorant. So that right there, when you read that, it said that it regardless, it's going to you're still going to come in contact with it independently. It's just a fact of this is our existence. This is where we are. And as long as we don't make it be something personal, and there's another line that I really like. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on a second. Then freedom and peace develops through the relinquishment of all self-referential views.
Yeah.
I like that one too. That's very beautiful.
Yeah. Isn't it?
That says it all. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean that's there's so much in here though. It's the key to the Dhamma, isn't it?
Yeah.
Michael, how are you tonight?
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. I like a lot of things in here. Try to stay focused. I do. Matt has said that that metaphor is a really strong metaphor, and just rubbing those things together is something so we could all relate to, and we realize we're creating friction, we're stressing. It's just it's a great point. And I think that it's like, that's when distractions are occurring and we're fabricating.
Yep.
That's when we're doing, when we're rubbing those sticks together, or they become plain, right? So another thing I like, in here is like several different places that the stilling of mind basically is pointed out, or still the distraction. The stilling is, I equate that with the breath and the body being united and mind being still. And when the mind is still, distractions are not fabrications, and distractions are not taken away from the peace and equanimity of it. So I just saw some of those things in there, and I like the way it was presented, and I think I have a better understanding of things through this sutta.
Good.
Good sutta.
Thank you, Michael. David.
Hey, John.
How are you?
Thank you for teaching. Good tonight.
Thank you for joining us. Hi, Kevin.
John, thank you. We take refuge in the three jewels tonight. Thank you.
Glad you're here. Larry.
Hello, John. Hello, everybody. And very happy to be back here.
Yeah, we all are.
Yes, it's and to experience just the very clear, repeated, cadence of the teaching and the beauty that it has and the simplicity and it's just, I read a lot of this, but it's a whole different experience when you do it with in the sangha, and with everyone else and others' observations and I mean, one word that kept kind of coming up for me and throughout this whole teaching is relief. There's great relief. I remember experiencing great relief, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago when it dawned on me that I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And I can start answering people's questions by saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like, wow, this is so easy. And prior to that time, you know, I was making things up because I didn't want you to think that I, you know, didn't know. And it's the same kind of feeling that washes over me. That's probably why I said earlier, and impermanence, because when I started having a deeper, more profound understanding of that, you know, that very thing, it was like, wow, what a relief.
Yeah.
Everything's impermanent. And,
Yeah.
and so this, and we were talking earlier about having, you know, references like that one golfer who had it on his glove as an intention or something. And I just, you know, I bet for, I don't know how many decades I've been wearing this little thing. It's just a reminder. And it's just,